Welcome back to another episode of Annie Makes Art School. I have a very special guest here who's going to talk to us a little bit about watercolors, which I'm really excited for because that is a medium that I am particularly challenged in. And we're also going to be able to tie this into kind of a bigger theme of artists and mental health. For a lot of us, art is a really valuable tool for kind of processing different emotions and moving through things. And so we're also going to touch on that a little bit. So to get things started, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how you began your art journey?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I am Kate Talcott, and I am the owner of Kate Talcott Artistry. We are a watercolor stationery and nifty gifties shop. So extra bonus points for cards with puns. And basically, I started my watercolor journey. I guess I never did like a formal art training growing up. Like I always liked farting around in art class and stuff, but like it was never something that I did in school, like, or, like in college for, I guess I took like an art class for, the general curriculum or whatever. But
I want to specify for anyone watching, the reason I made the like emoji face of shock at that information is if you have not seen her watercolors, they are stunning. And that this is a very good example of how you can become a very talented artist without going a traditional arts education route. That's amazing.
Well, thank you very much. Well, and that's why I love watching your videos, is because I'm like, oh, I never knew that. Like all the color theory stuff and things like that. So it's very helpful. But anyway, so I became a teacher and a librarian and middle school kids. And I love their curiosity. But when I had my daughter, it was just, I didn't want to go back into the classroom. And I kind of knew that, but I thought I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. I thought I was going to be like doing that whole thing. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was having some pretty serious postpartum anxiety and depression. And I'd never really like had that before in my life. Well, I realize now that I probably did, but like, it's like
a way of
okay, it makes sense now. But yeah, it was really tough. Trying to figure out like who I am if I'm not an educator, and trying to figure out like who I am as a mom, and dealing with 1,000 gajillion hormones. It's a lot. And so I had taken like a little watercolor class with Sarah Simon, the Mint Gardener, and she has some lovely watercolor books and things like that. She's amazing. And I had actually taken one with her in person. She's local to Seattle. Anyway, so I enjoyed it, and I started to do it a little bit, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I really like this. And so when my daughter would take her naps, I would start painting, and it was just for fun and just doing little projects here and there. I took the Watercolor Summit. So if you're wanting to get like a little bit more serious about watercolor, the Watercolor Summit is like amazing. It has all these different teachers, and they go over the basics, and it can really help build your skills if you already know the basics too.
Did you go into it choosing watercolor for a specific reason, or it just was kind of what was available to you?
One of the many things I love about watercolor is that it's super easy to just be like, well, I gotta go. And you can just leave your stuff out, it'll dry, like, then you just wet it again with water, and it's no big deal. Yeah, I started really finding a lot of myself in doing watercolor. It's a very peaceful, meditative thing, even though on TikTok I share a lot of videos and tutorials and things like that that are like not relaxing, because I'm like, go, we got it, like high energy. But for me, when I'm actually doing it, it's an incredibly peaceful, centering task. I really love that element of it. And there's the piece of watercolor too, that you're dealing with water, and water is unpredictable. Like you might know what you want it to do, but it's not always going to do exactly what you want. And that's a really good thing for a little type A person to, just kind of be at the beck and call of the elements, I guess. It's a good
thing that draws you to watercolor is the exact same thing that makes me like, I'm too type A for that. I can't.
It's very out of character, but I think it's like, I know it's good for me.
I can see that. Well, one of the reasons that I started the channel is that I just, especially on TikTok and Instagram, I hear a lot from other artists about either not having access to arts education or having a really negative experience with it. There are a lot of ways that can kind of go wrong. And so for people who are taking like a less traditional route to their arts education, they're kind of learning on their own. Is there a piece of advice that you've picked up somewhere along the way, either from taking a class or having a mentor, or maybe just something you've found on your own, that if you could go back and talk to like baby artist you'd be like, this is what you need to know?
Even still, sometimes I still am like, oh my gosh, who am I to call myself an artist? Like, I don't have this formal background. I mean, my husband went to school for art. Like, I don't feel like I always have like the credentials or whatever to call myself an artist. But the truth is if you enjoy making art, I mean, even if you sometimes don't enjoy it, if you're making art, you're an artist, right? Like, it doesn't, I feel like so much is like for the outward gaze, right? Like, how will this appear on Instagram, or how will this appear to other people? What will they think of it? And it's like, as long as you are enjoying what you do, I think that's going to be what shines through. I know it's like kind of cheesy to say, but it's true.
That's okay. It can be both of those things. So can you set up a little bit for us about what it is that you're going to be demoing today and why you feel like this is a good match for talking about kind of the therapeutic side of art?
Absolutely. Yeah. So today we are going to be learning some of the basic watercolor techniques that make watercolor. Those classic moves. But we're going to be doing it in a way that it is incredibly low stakes, low pressure. If you have never even looked at watercolor before, this is going to be approachable for you. It's not meant to be like so much what happens at the end of the session. It's more like the process of what's happening during the painting. Yes.
Perfect. So I talked with Kate beforehand, and as far as supplies, all we're going to need to have on hand is an assortment of brushes. She recommended a round brush. Is that right?
Yes. So a round brush is going to be the one that can come into a tip, but really just kind of a bigger brush because it's fun to take up space. You could also use a flat brush if you wanted to. No biggie.
I have grabbed a random assortment of brushes because I treat my brushes like garbage. So I grabbed some that looked the least like they were falling apart. And see what happens.
One.
And some paper to work on, some like Kleenex or tissue paper or something to dab with, and then your water and your paint, and that's it, right?
Yeah, that's it.
And a positive attitude.
Hi guys, I got us set up here, so you're gonna see a side angle, and then I also am recording from above, so you'll be able to see that however you edit it. And then I'm gonna take a spray bottle on my paints, and you really only need 2 paints for this. So if you have a spray bottle, great. If not, you can also just dip your brush in your water and just kind of wet the paints that you're gonna use. I'm gonna use my Opera Rose pink just because it's very bright and fun. And I just feel like I want some of that energy in my life. So you're going to make a really big paint puddle for this. And watercolor is interesting because it just needs water to activate. And I like to call them paint puddles because that's what they are. And puddles are fun. And so the way that you darken watercolor is just by adding, you're playing around with the ratio between paint and pigment. So the more water you add, the darker it's going to be, and the more pigment you add, or the paint, the more water you add, the lighter it's going to be. The more pigment you add, the darker it's going to be. So I'm using pink, and then I'm going to also use a blue. There we go. All right, you can do this. So I'm using Winsor & Newton professional grade paint, but again, this can be like Crayola, steal your paint from your kid kind of paint. Like, don't sweat it.
Potentially looking at my particular footage, I'm using an ancient old crusty watercolor kit that was my mother's. So
perfect. Yes, age has no boundaries. So what we're going to do first is we're going to learn the technique wet on wet. So with watercolor, when you are working with wet paint, if you bump it up against another piece of wet paint, it's going to mix together. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a circle It doesn't have to be perfect.
Or with water and paint?
Oh yes, with water and paint. So just get some, just dip your brush in your water, pick up a little of that paint puddle, and then you're just gonna make a nice little circle right there. Okay. And then we're not gonna wait for this to dry. We're gonna actually just get some of your other color. So if blue is color 1, then we're gonna get our color 2. And I want you to just drop your brush into it. Just kind of tap it lightly into that color. Do you see how the color is just kind of cascading? It's pushing away the first color out of the way, and your other color is taking over. So this is called wet on wet. And this is one of those watercolor techniques that is very particular to watercolor. Like you're not going to get this much with oil or acrylic unless you're really, really watering it down. Okay, so then what I want you to do is I want you to take your second color. So for me, that's the pink. And we are going to make a little circle right next to your original circle. And then I want you to bring the brush ever so closely so that they just kiss a little bit. Do you see how the blue is seeping into the pink, or whatever your first color is? Is it coming into the second color?
I feel like my red, the edge on my red where they're touching is like lifted a little on paper and dried. So now.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's a great point. So you're going to want to make sure that when you're working with wet on wet, that both pieces are still wet. So you might need to add a little bit more water. So no worries with that. Just make a big kind of like a juicy circle. So your second circle can be really juicy. You can add some more water if it's looking a little dry. And then what you're going to do, like maybe I can show it on here, but your mixture, I'm trying to think of a good, maybe you can see it here. See how we've got a lot of water in there? So it's like flowing, but it's not like just water.
I think part of the problem might be that I'm not using the fanciest of paper, so it's bowing a little bit on me, and that's.
Oh, okay.
But
the paper is.
Ahead. I will make it work. It's going. I have circles. They're touching.
Okay. So yeah, if your first circle dried, that's totally fine. You can just go ahead and add a second circle right next to it. Oh, preferably in the other color, so you can actually see what's happening. And you should see that the color is spilling into the circle next to it. Okay, and this is because basically it would be like if you poured orange juice into some champagne, right? Okay. It's going to mix together. So sometimes you pour in more orange juice to champagne. Sometimes you pour in more champagne to orange juice. Just speaking from personal experience. So this technique, when they come together and kind of kiss and share that color, is called the bleed technique because it's bleeding into the other color. So what we're going to do for our first little activity, and you can just kind of think of it as a little square here. I'm just going to do it on the same page, but you can get a new page, whatever you want. And we are going to just make shapes. You can do little circles, you can do abstract shapes, whatever. Like if you're maybe a perfectionist and are worried about your circles, maybe don't make them perfect. Maybe just do like a little brush stroke, whatever's not going to stress you out. So I think I am going to just, and you're going to want to make sure that your paint is juicy. So I don't know if you can see this on here, but you see how it's shiny? That means that it's still wet. So you're going to want to make sure that the paint that you're putting on has enough moisture that it's going to stay wet for a while. If it dries, again, no big deal. No big deal. So just take whichever color you want and just make a little shape. I'm just doing like a little whoop. And then you can grab your other color and we're just going to have them kiss. And then you can put pieces wherever you want on the page. It doesn't have to be in a row. It can just be random. You can make a little lines if you want, maybe like a bookshelf if you wanted, like books, or you don't have to. It's just watching the colors flow into each other, seeing how it happens.
Me on watercolor. I'm just like smiling at my paper, making my little marks.
Right? It's so peaceful. And because I'm mixing pink and blue, it's making this really beautiful purple, which is exactly what I was hoping it would do. Spring, so everything's blooming. And it can be just whatever. So as we're making our little splotches, I'm going to just share with you a little bit about why I like to do this. So one, it's a great way to practice how much moisture is on your brush and how much the paint is going to run into each other. So this is like the technical reason why I like to do it. I also like to do it because it allows me to see how colors would mix together in various levels. But the main reason why I like to do it is just because it's fun. It requires no like skill. It's just relaxing to watch the color flow on the page. And I think that this is a really great way to get comfortable with watercolor, because no matter what you do, it's going to look beautiful. You can be like, oh yeah, I meant to do this. Like there's a picture like this at Target in that like pre-made wall poster art. And this is just what they're doing. So like you could be in Target. Basically.
I love this kind of thing because for a long time I taught dance as my job. And one of the things I really enjoyed about that particular artistic mode is that there's an athletic side. So there's drills. It's expressive, but there's also like you should practice this particular footwork or this particular hip action or what have you. And I feel like a lot of times that's missing from a lot of fine arts practices where like it's really beneficial to do this kind of thing where it's not about building a finished product. It's about the exercises that are going to strengthen those skills.
That's such a good point. I never really thought about that because I feel like I do feel like there's a pressure to like come up with a finished piece every time. You know, every art session should be like a productive one. Did you just do a video about this? Somebody did. I can't remember who.
I haven't done anything in a minute. I've been in a cave.
Yeah, but it's true. And I think it's really great, especially when you're starting to work with a new color palette or if you got new brushes or new paint or new paper. This is a really great way to just play and relax and kind of like release that control. Speaking to my type A's out there. This is a really great way to just kind of let the water and the paint take over and let it do what it wants. Because if you're like, I want the pink to stay there, it's not happening unless you don't let it touch. And then where's the fun in that, right? So this is a really great opportunity to just let loose and get comfortable and familiar with your materials. Another thing that I love to do, I'm going to just do this in the corner kind of small, is make like, okay, I'm going to butcher the name, but the cairns, you know, the stacks of rocks that you find if you go hiking?
Oh, I do know, and I did not even know that there was a name for that, so I can't tell you the correct pronunciation.
So you can pick different colors and then just kind of like watch them flow together and just have them touch a little bit. And that's another really fun thing to do. Like, I've actually been dying to do a pattern of it where I just make little rock shapes and have them stack on top of each other and just see what happens.
Zen.
And yeah, exactly. And I heard that making those little rock piles can sometimes be like not the ecologically most friendly thing because it can kind of squish the little critters who might be scurrying around. And I was like, oh no. So this is a really eco-friendly way to not squish critters. And then another thing that you can do, guys, is just practice adding, like just have water on your brush. You don't even necessarily need paint. See what happens when you just make a splotch with just water next to one of your really saturated colors. So saturated just means that it's like one of those really deep colors with a lot of pigment. So Annie, what are you noticing when you do it with no water or with just water?
Just water, that you get very pretty flowy, blendy textures. I feel like it's a lot easier within the world of watercolor to create those kind of organic textures than like we all know oil paints are my like number one boo. I love oil. I would never want to her, but she does not help you out so much sometimes on those fronts. She's not flow unless you really ask nice. So
yes,
loving how you can just like put a streak down and you genuinely, kind of like what you were saying, you genuinely don't know what exactly it's going to do. And then sometimes you're like, oh, okay, I can work with that.
right. Yeah, like just like Bob Ross says, right? Happy little accidents or whatever. And it really is. Sometimes you just got to let it stay, and that's part of the focal point or the beauty of the watercolor. So yeah, this is something that can be just really peaceful and kind of playful. And if you're feeling like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I really need to control things to center my anxiety. And this is something I like to do to help just release that.
I love that. And I'm curious because I know, having looked at some of your finished pieces, that in addition to like very meditative flowing work, you also do very like controlled, intense work.
Yes.
Process, does this ever like transition into that, or are those two worlds that don't touch?
So it's a very interesting thing. I think the main reason why a lot of my work doesn't show a lot of this relaxing is because I am a control freak. But I'm really excited because I've been working on this new style that incorporates part of the unexpected pieces of watercolor with the really detailed stuff. And I still get into that, like, what's that? It's like a Zen state. There's some word for it where you're just like in super focus, where it's like,
your vocabulary quizzing me today.
Oh yeah, well, I don't know words because I got baby brain out the wazoo. So, it's like a fugue state. Is that what it's called?
Oh yeah, a fugue state is a thing.
Yeah. See, we got it. But I do get like really zoned in with those meticulous details, and I like that. But I know that it's not relaxing for a lot of people. So I have been trying to add more of that loose factor in. Plus, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's compelling visually. And I feel like it's good for me. It's like, like eating your kale or whatever. So yeah, this next one, we are going to do something called bloom. So what you're going to do is you are going to just get a big wet blob in the center, and you're going to want it to be pretty saturated. So a lot more paint in your water mixture. You can pick any color you want. I think I'm going to pick my Perylene Violet. I don't know how to say that. Perylene?
Could be. I'm using
that beautiful purple. What color are you going to use in your circle?
I'm going to use green. For the last round, I did the primaries.
I bet primaries were fun to do because then you can really see how they went.
It's still a little drippy, so I don't want to dip it too much, but
Oh yes, I love it. Oh my gosh, it's so playful. I love it.
But green is one of my favorite colors, and I feel like rude for having left it out, so I'm going to go with green.
Yeah, you give it its time to shine. I love it. So as you're making this, you're going to want to kind of make sure that it's wet enough that it is going to react to the next thing that we are going to do, which I'm going to tell you about soon. But I don't want to give it away yet. I'm not ready.
Anticipation. I love it.
Yeah. So just make sure it's got a lot of pigment in here. You don't want it so drippy that it's like making like a bubble on the page, but you also don't want it so dry that when you move your brush that it kind of like skids like that. You want it to just kind of flow on, and that's like if you're moving your brush through this, you should kind of see it like see the water moving. when you do that. So when you make a big shape like this, it's called a wash when you're covering an area. And so this is a nice even wash, ideally. And now we're going to learn about the bloom technique. And so a bloom is when you add water to an already created, like into the pigment on the page. So instead of mixing any water in here, we're actually going to just add water directly onto the page. And I want you to add this with your breath. So we're going to breathe in. And as you breathe out, I want you to put your paintbrush anywhere on your shape. Okay? Get some more water, breathe in, and just let it drop onto your page as you breathe out. And you'll notice that the paint is being pushed away by the water. And this is kind of like, as you breathe, you're making space for the quiet and the calm and for yourself. So I know I'm very bouncy and upbeat, but this one's a little bit more quiet and calm. Another thing that you can do is you can put it along the edge. You can just bring your, oh, here, I'll show you here. You can kind of just bring it along the edge and watch how the water pushes the paint away along the edge.
It's really cool. It's kind of like I know from my very limited watercolor experience about being able to like put salt onto the paint, and this is like a effect, but in so much more gentle of a way. Like salt is so like aggressive with it.
Yes.
This is like very zen.
Yes, and this is actually almost the opposite, because what the salt does is it sucks up the moisture. So if I was to put, I can actually do it just to show you guys since I'm here. So this would be what salt would look like, and it kind of sucks up the moisture from around it. And that's how it creates the lighter spaces. Whereas what we're doing is we're adding water, and that is creating the lighter spaces. So it's really cool to see the opposite sides of the coin. And I love how it almost looks like Elsa in Frozen, like. And the cool thing about this, like if you just kind of wait as this dries, the drier it is, the more profound the effect is going to be. So like this section for me is a little bit drier. So if I add water into here, it's going to be a lot more bloomy. Whereas if it's a wetter part of the design or of the shape, it's going to be a little bit more, can you see this one? It's a little bit just more spread out. So, and you can do this as you breathe in and breathe out. And sometimes I like to do this just from a technique standpoint. I like to practice my washes. So like getting a nice even wash, you can do an even wash where everything's together, or you can do like a gradient wash where you start really dark. I don't know if you can see that. And then you'd add more water and create it really much lighter. And then once I've practiced that, since it's just for me, I like to just drop water into it for my own personal enjoyment. And just to practice like brush control and how much water's in the brush and things like that. But it's also just nice to look at. And I like to think about it as my breath.
I love it. I feel like this is gonna really get me on a abstract path for a minute. Like I'm just really being shaped.
Yeah, and that's the fun thing is like, just because I do detailed watercolor doesn't mean that I have to like stick with that all the time, right? Like I feel like so often we get stuck into our niche. And while I think I mean, you've talked about this a little bit, like sometimes I think from a certain angle, it's good to like have things that you do, but it's also really important for your soul as an artist to do other things. I
literally don't understand how anyone sticks to a niche, even school and having people tell me to. I was like, but there's so much stuff to play with. How? Why? How? I can't.
Right?
Bill?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we're going to use one more sheet of paper. Or if you have room on your other sheets of paper, you can. So I'm using Arches, which is like way more expensive paper than you want to use for this, but all my cheap paper is inside in my daughter's playroom. So you guys get the good stuff from me today. But there is no need to get fancy paper for these kind of exercises.
I'm pad of watercolor paper I got from like Target for a few bucks.
Yes.
It's out there.
Yes, and I'm actually doing a video of my favorite like easy, quick watercolor supplies. Hopefully posting tomorrow. So
I love cheap art supplies, but I also have been burned by them before. So I love when people recommend the ones that are worth it.
I literally bought like 10 different sets and I was like, okay, here we go. I tested them all out. So we're rolling. Okay, so for this next one, we're gonna practice flooding. So pick your favorite color that you want to use. I keep wanting to use Scarlet Lake, which is like a fiery orange red, but like it's not very chill, so I'm not gonna do it for you guys. So I'm gonna use the Halo turquoise. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna practice making a big line, and you're gonna make an even. So like I don't have enough water on my paintbrush here. You're just gonna make an even stripe across your page. So we're practicing making an even wash here. And you can kind of practice pushing the paint around to make sure that the color is even. And just this act in and of itself can be very meditative. You'll notice that as you, like if you're moving your paintbrush around, as you pick your paintbrush up, a lot of the paint will settle into the wherever you pick the paintbrush up. So you might want to pick your paintbrush up in a spot where it's maybe a little bit less colored, less colorful, maybe a little more white, and then where you can see the paper more. Or you can also, if it's like, if there's a really big spot, you can just dry your paintbrush off on your paper towel and then just kind of suck it up like you're absorbing it like a spill on the kitchen counter. And that's called lifting. We're just gonna make a nice even rectangle across your page. And now I want you to pick whatever color you want. I'm going to pick, ooh, tough choice. I think I'll go back to my pink, I think. And we're going to practice the concept of flooding. So flooding is when you use a certain amount of watercolor on your brush, and it's either so much water and pigment that it's going to push the other color out of the way, or the original piece, so the stripe here, is going to have more liquid and the other one's going to like suck it up.
Do we want the stripe to be, how wet should it be?
Oh, pretty wet. Okay. So yeah, if it's looking like it's starting to dry, just go ahead and add some more pigment in there. No biggie. Okay, that's a great question. Okay, so pick up your other color and you can just make, here, I'll do it down here. You can just make like a little shape up and see which way the color goes. Does your stripe push into your blop, or does your blop push into your stripe?
My blop pushes into my stripe.
Nice. So that means your blop has more water than your stripe. And so this is a great way to work on like figuring out how much water to use and how much, like how dry or how wet you want your shapes. But it's also just really cool to look at. So now maybe try to make, so your blop pushed into your stripe, right? Mm-hmm. So now try to get a paint puddle that maybe has less water in it and see what happens. Maybe your stripe, if your stripe is drier, then the blue, your line is going to push into your blob. Let me know if that worked for you.
I don't know. My blops really want to blop.
And that's okay. So that might speak to how wet your line is. And it could, so this is something where paper does come into play because the more like Arches, the reason why I like it so much, it is expensive, but it holds the water a little bit longer. So you're going to get, depending on what paper you're using, you're going to get different reactions. And I will say, like, if you're ever doing a project on new paper, this is a great one to do, because like a great exercise to do to test that paper out, because you're definitely going to want to know how fast things dry and which way the paint is going to move. So this is a great technique if you're painting flowers, like if you're doing like loose florals. A lot of times you'll see people kind of have the little, oh, that's way too much, but you'll see like the little dots in the middle or whatever. It's like a ton of pigment. And then they'll have the flower petal like that. And then they'll just kind of kiss the middle and it'll bleed into the bottom of the petal. And so that's basically the technique that they're using here, is they are counting on the middle piece to bleed into the outer piece. If does that make sense?
That does make sense. I immediately had to rush to try and make a flower.
Yeah, if you want to do a flower, great. If the flower feels too intimidating, no biggie. Yeah, so just those little dots in the middle. And it just makes a really cool effect. Like if you can see, it feels really natural.
Yeah.
And here would be an example, like this part is drying. This part is dry and this part is still wet. And that maybe wouldn't be what I was hoping for, but it's a really happy little accident because it's really quite beautiful with the blue seeping in to only that part. So just like go with the flow.
So much more like soft and gentle of a palette, and I'm using like neon like crayon colors, and part of that is probably just like what choices I'm making. Is part of that also the like, am I over leaning on the paint versus the water?
Ooh, can I see your page? Do you think you can lift it up so I can kind of peek?
Very wet, but it's so bold.
Ooh, I think it's just the colors that I'm using.
Okay.
But I will say, if you want it to look a little bit softer, like so, or blendy. So if you want it to look a little bit softer, it's just going to be more water to paint. So like this right here doesn't have a lot of paint. And I just put it in the pink, but that looks purple blue because I've been kind of mixing back and forth. So that's actually another side note tip, is to like mix the colors in between. So like if your palette is looking really like neon and you're wanting something a little softer, just add a little bit of, like, I would add a little bit of pink to my turquoise and just a tiny little turquoise to my pink, and that will mute the palette in a really nice kind of earthy way.
Do you use white paint?
Ooh, great question. So watercolor is interesting because most people do not, I mean, I don't know if most people, but I don't use white very often. So with watercolor, what keeps the white is you have to preserve that white or that light spot through doing very light layers or not painting on it at all. So with oils, I believe most commonly you're starting with the darks and you're building up to light. Is that?
If you follow the rules and do what you're supposed to, theoretically, yeah.
Yeah, okay. But so with watercolor, theoretically, you would want to go backwards. So you'd start with your lightest lights and then move into the darker darks. That being said, I will use a bleed-proof white or like a white jelly roll pen for like eye highlights or like whiskers or things like that.
Well, let's say theoretically you're someone who loves the color pink and your kit only has red.
Yeah, so I will say pink, it's okay to add a little white. I mean, you do you, right? Like, you make the rules. So yes, that is a great way to make because you got to make pink. And I will say I have like a couple pinky shades. So I have, they used to call it flesh tone, and now it has a different name that is more inclusive of skin color. But I can't remember what the new name is. It's like Dusty Rose or something. And it's a gouache, which is like a mixture between acrylic and watercolor. So you activate it with water like watercolor, but it's more opaque, or you can't see through it as much as like an acrylic. So I have some of that I will use sometimes for a pink to kind of give it that like milky look. And then I have Opera Rose here. And what is this one? It's like Rose Madder or something, I think. But yeah, those are my babies.
I have like 3 different reds, but all of them, when I water them way, way down, technically they're pink, but not that like yummy bubblegum awesome pink.
Right. Like, and I guess if you would use like a cooler red, maybe, you could add like a little blue to like one of those fiery reds to almost make it like a smidgy cooler, like purpley. It will get you a little more pink.
Color theory.
Yeah, I don't know the technical terms for that, but it's a thing. And yeah, so this one with Flood, so we started with the bleed, which is the release of control. And that's this one right here. Boop. Okay, and then we moved to the bloom, where we practice breath control. I guess I can turn it to my face. And then we practiced Flood, which is a way to reintroduce you having the power in the situation and guiding it into the way that you're hoping it will go, and playing in a way that will allow you to master the water in a way. Yeah. So, but I think it's also like a good lesson that it's not always going to work how you want it to. It's humbling. And then just the final thing that I wanted to say about watercolor is it's really important that you're patient, because you have to wait for things to dry if you're wanting to like work on top of it. Because if you start painting and it's not all the way dry, it's going to start bleeding or blooming or flooding. And if that's not what you're wanting, you're going to be really bummed. So one way to know if your watercolor is dry is you can put a finger over your paint. So don't touch it, but just put a finger over it, hovering. And if it feels cool, like if you feel kind of like just a cool air, it's very subtle, but that's going to mean it's still wet. But if you don't feel anything, you can just kind of tap your finger and then it's dry. And then if it's not dry, you can just breathe and think about breathing and relaxing, or you can grab your hairdryer like me and not be patient.
Hairdryer seems dangerous with all that air moving the water around. I feel like
that is true. Like it can. I mean, I have like my little heat embosser tool. Yeah, if there's a lot of water, it will push the paint and the pigment around. So it's always better to be
say that from experience as a very impatient creator. I wouldn't do anything, but I'll keep using it.
The next one.
This has been so delightful. I cannot thank you enough. I learned a lot. I feel like I could sit here for the next 12 hours just making abstract shapes and having them so into each other. This was so wonderful. I was absolutely a slight anti-watercolor person, and you have immediately converted me. I'm sure. Do you have any final thoughts, any parting words, and anything that you want to plug?
Yeah, thank you so much for watching along. If you want to find me on social media, I am on TikTok, and that's where I share most of my tutorials, and I'm on Instagram as well. And I would love it if you tag me. I'm at Kate Talcott Artistry. And I'd love to see what you're doing. I like genuinely enjoy seeing people create art. So it makes me very, very happy. And will never feel spammy. So share away. I love to cheer you on. And I am opening up workshops. So if you have like a group, I do virtual workshops. I'm also local to the greater Seattle area. So I do in-person workshops or workshops virtually. So if you want folks to kind of get together and I can show you how to do something and we can make a fun little event for you, I can even ship off supplies if you don't have any. So that's a really fun way to work together. So yeah, I can't wait to paint with you in any way, shape, or form.
I will leave her handles and various information in the show notes, but please go check her out. You have got to see. I'll put some examples up in the edit of some of your work. It is so fabulous. And truly, if anyone followed along and did your own version of these exercises, it makes me so happy when people post their like Annie Makes Art School homework. So tag her, tag me, tag everybody. We want to see your beautiful color puddles and what you soothed your way through on this journey.
Yes!
So thank you so much. And I'm going to pause the recording right there.
All right.